So over the past 2 years, we've noticed a really interesting trend among our success stories. Namely, the fact that oftentimes our success stories are seeing success when they've completely gotten over or moved on from their exes. So I'm going to attempt to explain why I believe this interesting phenomenon of you moving on and your ex wanting you back when you've moved on continues to occur for our clients time and time again. And if you stick around to the end of this video, not only am I going to answer that question for you, but I'm going to back it up with real psychological theories. So over the past 2 years, we've had more success stories come through our program and our coaching sessions than we've ever had before. And this is good for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's good for the people who were succeeding in getting their exes back, but it's also really good for us because we believe two things are occurring. Number one is we're getting more time to interview these people to understand what they did that actually worked, and therefore updating our own advice to other people. But we're also believing that the more success stories that we're seeing come through our program, the more we believe that we're getting closer and closer to the critical mass of understanding why exes come back to you. So let's just start from the top. We believe there's this interesting phenomenon that continues to be present among almost every single one of our success stories. Now, it's different and there's subtle variations to each of these different success stories, but here's the interesting phenomenon we're noticing. Among the people that I have interviewed who have successfully gotten their exes back, at some point, they always mention that during the no contact rule or after the no contact rule, they kind of shifted their mindset. They changed their paradigm to the point where they're thinking, you know what, I'll be okay if I don't get my ex back. Maybe I shouldn't get my ex back. And that subtle shift seems to make all the difference in the world. But how? It doesn't really make any sense. You simply believing, hey, I'll be okay without my ex, or hey, I'm gonna move on now, shouldn't give your ex any type of indications that this is how you're feeling, right? How is it that they're picking up on this and actually wanting to come back to you? Well, we believe studying attachment style theories can potentially explain this phenomenon. So I could literally write an entire research paper on attachment style theory, but here's sort of the gist since we don't have all the time in the world. There are 4 main attachment styles that can help us understand and dictate how people interact or act during their relationships. Secure attachment style, avoidant attachment style, anxious attachment style, and fearful attachment style. Now, each one of these attachment styles has a different way of understanding or acting in specific relationships. So, for example, a secure attachment style is someone who has a secure attachment style. When they go through a breakup, they will allow themselves time to grieve, but they're not going to get so hung up on wanting their ex back. They'll simply move on and be like, you know what, I enjoyed my time with that person, but maybe I can find someone else out there. And then they don't really worry too much more about it. Yes, it's possible they can get depressed for a period of time, but they don't dwell in that depression. One word I would use to describe someone with a secure attachment style is fortitude. They know they have the fortitude to overcome anything that life throws in their way. Now, the polar opposite of this is an anxious attachment style. Now, an anxious attachment style is someone who literally puts their whole identity into the relationship. These are the people who are often exhibiting extreme anxious behaviors after a breakup. So, a few anxious behaviors would include begging for their exes back, pleading for them to come back, seeking constant validation after the relationship and during the relationship, becoming extremely possessive. These are all examples of anxious style attachments. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, to kind of move further down here, we have avoidant styles. Now, avoidants do really want relationships, but they're kind of like lone wolves. So oftentimes they get stuck in this self-fulfilling cycle where they want a relationship, they get into a relationship oftentimes with someone with anxious sort of attachment disorders, and then once that person seeks constant validation and begins to threaten that avoidant person's independence, they retreat. They often leave, or they will become extremely silent, not necessarily breaking up with them yet, but you can tell something's wrong, and then ultimately they do leave, and the cycle starts again and again and again. Now, the final attachment style is one that we're not really going to talk about much. That's the fearful attachment style. This is kind of like the worst of both worlds. So they take the worst aspects of someone who has an anxious attachment disorder, and they take the worst habits of someone who has an avoidant attachment disorder. So oftentimes they will do this flip-flop between becoming extremely anxious in a relationship and then becoming extremely avoidant in a relationship. Now, only 7% of the entire population has been diagnosed with a fearful attachment style. That means most of the time, when you're dealing with breakups, you're dealing with two attachment styles: anxious and avoidant. And usually you can divide the anxious attachment styles and the avoidant attachment styles into two distinct categories. The people who usually get dumped are the people with anxious attachment styles, and the people who usually do the dumping are the people with avoidant attachment styles. Hey there, real quick before we get you back to your video, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that. It really does help. It helps keep our video editors paid. It helps us keep doing these high quality videos. And it's really 5 seconds out of your day to click one little button. So if you could, please just click the subscribe button. No harm, no foul if you're not interested, but we figured we'd try. All right, let's get you back to your video. Now here's what we think can help describe the phenomenon we're seeing where people who move on suddenly reattract their exes. We know from studying our own client base that most of the people who come to us have anxious attachment styles, whereas their exes have avoidant attachment styles. So someone with an avoidant attachment style will already have certain assumptions about someone with an anxious attachment style, specifically if they were in a relationship with that person for a long enough period of time. Now, where this comes into play is if you do the proper work during no contact, if you actually move on from your ex, you're no longer exhibiting any type of anxious behaviors. You're acting like kind of a normal person should. And this kind of makes an avoidant look back at you. Now, this is further backed up when we actually understand how avoidants sort of operate. Okay, so here's the first thing that you need to understand about avoidant attachment styles. People with avoidant attachment styles have a tendency to romanticize past lovers or idealize yet to be found future lovers, as both concepts keep true vulnerability at a safe distance. Now, this is an incredibly insightful thing to understand about your ex. If your ex has an avoidant attachment style, they're oftentimes not going to begin missing you or having any type of nostalgia or any kind of remembering positively of the past until they feel like there's no chance they can get you back. They want you as distant as possible so that they can feel safe enough to romanticize you. Now, the interesting thing is most people with anxious attachment styles do the opposite of giving an avoidant any kind of space after a breakup. They continue to needle and fix things because they need their world fixed. They need everything fixed for their life to be right, and their entire life is this relationship, which kind of further pushes the avoidant away and away and away. So, when you kind of move on, you start exhibiting more secure characteristics, and this allows your ex time to romanticize the past. And typically speaking, really with attachment styles, it really helps you understand the timing of when you should be reaching out to your ex. So specifically, with an avoidant attachment style, assuming your ex has this avoidant attachment style, you want to reach out to them during the correct time. And the correct time is always going to be when they're having that big bout of nostalgia, when they're romanticizing you. Then you reach out to them and they'll feel like you're a new person. So we think that our program, the way we kind of teach people to do a no contact rule, specifically longer periods of no contact, is giving their avoidant exes enough time to romanticize the past, and then they kind of get back in touch with that avoidant ex and exhibit more secure characteristics in conversations with them, which of course turns that person on because that person looks at you in an entirely new light. But attachment styles alone will not fully describe what's happening here. So what we know is moving on from an ex is actually one of the smartest things that you can do. But ultimately, when an ex does break up with you, and we're finding that most of our clients are the dumpies, they're the people who've been broken up with, there's a certain underlying assertion when someone breaks up with you. And that assertion is that they think they can do better than you. So we actually also believe the grass is greener syndrome plays an important role in why you moving on actually makes them want you more. If you really think about it, the grass is greener syndrome is all about opportunity cost. Now, if you're not familiar with opportunity cost, it's something oftentimes economists will talk about. The specific definition of opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. So opportunity cost really is all about regret, or not so much regret, but think of it like this. You are walking down a path and you hit a crossroads. You can either go left or you can go right. Let's say you go right and all of a sudden you walk into a pit of quicksand and you're being swallowed up by the quicksand. At some point while you're being swallowed up by that quicksand, you're going to think to yourself, wow, I really wished I had went left instead of right. This is essentially what's happening with the grass is greener syndrome. So let's say that your ex breaks up with you and they think they can do better than you. And what we find is oftentimes when they actually go out and try to do better than you, it's not as easy as they thought. And this can actually help trigger them missing you more so that your value is risen if you are actually beginning to move on. And you don't necessarily have to move on by sort of going out with someone else. This can be moving on just by sort of not obsessing so much about your ex and exhibiting secure sort of behaviors. Maybe going on a few dates but not actually dating anyone. Well, if your ex is moving on to other people or thinking they can do better than you and quickly realizing they were wrong with their assertion and then they look back over at you, the opportunity cost question comes up into their head. What would life have been like if I had just not broken up with him or her? And then all of a sudden what happens is if they see you moving on, your value is fully raised because this is not how this was supposed to go. I was the one to break up with them. They're the one that's supposed to be suffering. I'm the one that's supposed to have the greatest life in the world, and you can see where I'm going with this. So, to recap, the most important element that you should be focusing on if you have been broken up with by your ex is actually beginning to work on moving on from your ex. Because this does a couple of things. It can trigger the grass is greener syndrome like we just asserted, or what it can do is ultimately show that you are not the anxious version of yourself that you were during the middle of the relationship and maybe at the end of the relationship and maybe a little after the breakup. The point is, you're trying to exhibit the most secure type of attachment behavior as you possibly can because this indicates to your ex something is different. And anytime something is different, the uncertainty principle gets triggered. We all know human beings kind of love uncertainty. It raises our value a little bit. And we always want to raise our value. Hey there, if you're interested in learning how to get your ex back, or more specifically what your chances are of getting your ex back, on our website www.exgirlfriendrecovery.com, we've put together a special quiz designed to basically tell you what kind of chance you have of getting your ex back in your specific situation. Now, if you're interested in taking this quiz and you're watching this on YouTube, like many of you probably are, just simply look in the description below this YouTube video and click the link you see there. We'll take you directly to the quiz where we can get started. Also, if you haven't liked, commented, but most importantly, subscribed to the YouTube channel, if you could please do so, we would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.